Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. It's good to see you again and good to see so many friends on the line, friends and familiar faces. A whole bunch of friends. I was gonna start naming folks, but then I'm gonna get in trouble. But I certainly see a whole, none of us are strangers. So I'll go there. I do, I, uh, I do have to certainly acknowledge my good friend and somebody who spent a lot of time on our board, Sister. And is she Reverend yet, Kimmy Carlos? I know she's working on it. Uh, and so I do want to acknowledge her, but all so many friends here. And again, thank you for the invitation tonight. It's good to be with you all again. It's been some time, but it's good to be here. But before I uh, really get into things, I need to pause and honor someone whose life and work certainly shaped my own journey, Barbara Flife. Barbara was more than an advocate. She was a moral compass and one of the co-founders of this group and somebody who fought tirelessly against racism. She's always stood boldly, and she knew how to get me to show up anywhere and pretty much do anything she said. So she was very instrumental in my early advocacy days, and so she certainly taught us that justice is not an event, that it's a lifelong commitment. So. I stand to honor her tonight and consider it a great privilege to even be here and to lift up her name. Um, so I come here tonight, not just as an advocate. I'm a preacher. I'm a religious man, and so I'm a true believer in transformative power, collective action, and this whole New Jersey statewide Black agenda, which I've had the privilege to work with Mayor Raz Baraka together to bring about, is not some arbitrary list of demands. It is really a moral declaration. It's a roadmap of sorts. It's a vision around equity, and it's not some crazy aspirational thing. It's very practical, and it's something that can actually happen if the moral will to do it is there. And it is indeed a Black agenda. There's many agendas out there. The people's agenda, there's progressive agendas. This is a very focused agenda, and in no way is about division. And anybody that knows me knows I'm a staunch advocate for Black people, and that's where I put my time, my energy, my focus. Um, and this has never been about division to me. It's about repair, and it's about building a state where every child, regardless of zip code, has the chance to thrive, where justice is not selective, but justice actually becomes systemic. Wouldn't that be something? Where opportunity is not a privilege, but it's a promise. For the religious folks on the line, Howard Thurman, the great mystic, once said, "The dream is the bearer of a new possibility, the enlarged horizon, the great hope." And this agenda is indeed a dream, not in Martin Luther King sense, more of a vision, and more of something that can actually be achieved, very practical. So why is this agenda necessary? New Jersey, as you all know, is one of the wealthiest states in America, but ranks amongst the worst for racial disparities and incarceration, maternal health, the wealth gap, education. These are not accidents, as my dear brother Ryan Haygood would say, but this is all by design. Black communities remain disproportionately impacted by these systemic inequities in housing, policing, economic opportunity. Um, and the truth is, as also Ryan would say, if policy created these disparities, policy too must dismantle them. As James Cone reminds us, any message that is not related to the liberation of the poor in a society is not the message of Christ. So I approach everything from a Black liberation lens, a Black liberation theological lens, and teaches us, right, that God is on the side of the oppressed. So that's what drives me every single day. Justice is not charity, justice is a covenant. So to ignore these disparities is to break covenant with humanity and with God. Until the state and entities, private and public, re-engage covenant with the most impacted, we are out of order. We can't claim to love mercy and walk humbly while ignoring the cries of those that are crushed by this system. Silence is sin, neutrality is complicity. So how does this Black agenda ultimately benefit everybody? This is not a zero-sum game. Justice for Black people does not mean just injustice for others. It's that kind of mentality that gets us this wickedness in Washington, D.C. right now, this grievance um, mentality. And I would say a religion of grievance, which has helped to drive what we see in Washington, D.C. So justice for Black folks in no way means injustice for others. In fact, history has shown us that the greatest benefactors of policies directed towards Black people or that have been advocated by Black people, other folks have been greater benefactors of that than Black folks. So, if we're talking about affirmative action, white women are the greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action and DEI policies. When we're talking about the 14th Amendment, right, and birthright citizenship, other folks have benefited of all of these things that Black folks have advocated for. Because when you address the issues which have been targeted to dismantle, dehumanize, and take rights away from the most despised people in the American context, it by extension benefits everyone. So if you want to heal a whole body, go after the places where the cancer targets the most. And we're lying to ourselves if we ever think that the place and the people that have been most targeted consistently from the inceptions of this nation have not been Black people and continue to be Black people. So this benefits everybody. A Black agenda, by definition, ultimately benefits everybody. So if we close the racial wealth gap, it strengthens the entire state economy. In terms of public safety, with community-led solutions, reduce violence, it fosters trust, and that creates safety for everyone. In terms of democracy, if we expand voting rights and fair representation, it enriches civil rights for all. Shared humanity, when those most marginalized rise, the entire society rises. When we invest in equity, we invest in stability, we dismantle barriers, we unleash potential, and when we fight for justice, we fight for the soul of the state. So, the statewide Black agenda, we're looking at things like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to protect and expand voting rights. A robust democracy helps everybody. And as we've seen, the more that we leaned into those things, even here in New Jersey, the better the outcomes are. When we give incarcerated folks a second chance, it actually makes the state safer. When we fought to get 9,000 people out of prison, when we have fought these things around police accountability, when we have fought to have greater investments in community-led infrastructures, violent crime is at its lowest in New Jersey than it has been in years. There are historic lows in terms of violent crime. We talk about things like jury selection, to have people more involved in the jury pools. Folks who were formerly system involved to now actually be a part because they have a different kind of framework and understanding and experience that addresses the disparities in the system. Black maternal health initiatives, if there are less horrible things happening to Black women, it helps everybody. A more equitable health system, because this health system isn't particularly great for anybody, but it is particularly horrible for Black women. And if we take care of that, ultimately, we're making a better situation for everyone. So these are just a few of the items in the Black agenda that we are looking to push. And if you look at the Black agenda, there's issues on mental health, education in terms of the school segregation issues. There are issues around LGBTQIA sisters and brothers getting greater protections. And there's so much in there. And there's a host of things that are not actually on the published document, which we still have to work through. But we have gone through, we have talked to literally thousands of people throughout the state in these agenda meetings, which have been held in Black churches across the state. The next one being on December 13th at Shiloh Baptist Church in Plainfield, New Jersey, where my friend, the Dr. Danielle Brown, is the pastor. And we collect information. There's a portal in which folks are submitting information. So whether it's health issues, economic issues, education issues, whether it's the vast amount of work that's been done by the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice and the Reparations Council, there's a wealth of study that has been done and many policies on the table which can get at these various issues. And it is that framework, sisters and brothers, that brings us to this statewide agenda. Because none of us are free until all of us are free. And the day that we see that in the American context, I would say more broadly, in the Western world, really the global context, as I consider myself someone, the older I get, very passionate about advocating for the global Black diaspora, which has suffered from the greatest global crime in the history of the world, a human trafficking ring that has expanded throughout the entire Western world, and every Black body is evidence of it wherever we find ourselves on the globe, even on the continent where our resources have been stolen, things appropriated and colonized. These things are evidence right in front of us of the greatest theft, human trafficking, the greatest genocide, global genocide known to humanity, lives right in front of us every day when we see Black people. So, considering myself someone passionate about advocating for the global Black diaspora, I find it important that we understand that until we reconcile the truth of what has been done, that we all will continue to be shackled by it. and will never be able to be free from it. And so I'm crazy enough to believe that we all can get to the promised land, but that requires repentance and repair. And we'll never get there if we don't tell the truth and we don't focus and deal with the actual thing. And so that's why I advocate for a Black agenda. That's why I focus on the Black church. That's why I focus on Black people. Thank you very much for a couple of minutes of your time to present that. I'll put a link, if you all don't have it, in the chat to our website that has the Black Agenda pieces published there. And that's where the things will live and where they will be updated. And I believe I'm taking questions.
Thank you so much, Reverend Boyer. And thank you so much for agreeing to take questions. So if people will either use the reaction link at the bottom of the screen and do the raise hand, or raise your actual hand, I will look for people with questions and convey them to Reverend Boyer. Actually, may I start with a question, Reverend Boyer?
Absolutely.
I was looking at the list of the people on the transition teams for
Mhm.
Governor-elect Mikie Sherrill, and I saw names like Ryan Haygood and Reverend Eric Dobson and your First Lady, Rosalie Boyer. And I wanted to find out your reaction to these teams, who was named, and also if there's anything that Mikie Sherrill has said post-election vis-a-vis the Black agenda, or issues that you feel are of concern, and anything that gives you a sense of which direction she's going in.
Yeah, so I think I have been well. I'll back up a little bit for I'm not sure how closely folks follow things, but obviously I was a major supporter of Ras Baraka in the primary. We actually I have to update because I have to update the profile because Salvation and Social Justice now has a C4, so we can no longer exactly say that we're nonpartisan because I found it necessary. I saw it as a piece, I saw it as leaving Black power on the table without being able to weigh in on elections. So, as you, Linda, I think so eloquently pointed out, we were very deliberate in this election in order to be able to push forward a Black agenda, which meant we had to lean in. And so I supported Ras Baraka because he was the best representation of a Black agenda. And part of that work, and when he did not prevail, but he did make a very strong showing, in order to unite the party, right? Those things, all of that had to be negotiated, and certainly for my support, those things were negotiated. And I have to say that Governor-elect Sherrill has won a tremendous amount of respect from me for the way that she has engaged. I mean, we've had some, she'll tell you, we've had some discussions. Um, and she hasn't backed down from a fight, and she hasn't cowered or um shied away from or been retributive in any kind of way when we don't agree. And I have the utmost respect for that. And she has really leaned in So I've gotten to know her and her team much better. Uh, and everything from the transition to various conversations that we've talked specifically about the agenda. I think the transition team, you can see very clearly there are some very focused people on that team. They have leaned in all the way. I don't. I've said to her people, I don't expect Mikie Sherrill to show up, with an afro pumping a black fist. I don't know but what I look for is a good partner. I understand that government has to be practical, and I understand that black folks are not the only constituency. But that doesn't mean that we can't get real work done, and it doesn't mean that we should shy away from doing what's right. And I have to tell you, so far, I am very impressed. And if you asked me this 4 or 5 months ago, I would not be the guy I think that would say this. But I've been very impressed with the posture of uh, of the governor-elect, of the lieutenant governor-elect, and the way that they're doing things, the intentionality behind it. Um, so I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to have a good partner. I don't think we're going to get everything we want. I don't think it's going to be like super ultra progressive, but I think we have an honest actor. And I think we have somebody that does have a moral compass, but that is extremely practical um, in how they do things. And I think, right, we need to understand that because if we're going to get stuff done, there's going to have to be a give and take. So everything doesn't have to be a four alarm fire, a 5 alarm fire. We can get things done. We just have to, I think, all play nice in the sandbox.
Thank you. Kimmy, you have a question.
Reverend Boyer, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for all of the work that you and your wife, Rosalie, and Salvation and Social Justice and Grant AME does across the state. I have great respect for you, as you know that. So I really appreciate your time tonight. And I appreciate the shout out. Clearly, all of the issues on the Black agenda are extremely important. And I was really excited to hear you talk about the need to advocate for Black women. I'm sure we all understand womanist theology. And when we lift those that are the most marginalized, then we lift everybody. When we lift from the bottom, we lift everybody. And I do agree that Black women and most women of color are the most oppressed and marginalized around the world. Having said that, looking at the different areas of the Black agenda, what gets me excited is the section here on the website that talks about civic engagement. The way we oppress a community is keep people ignorant. And we often don't really know how to do the advocacy work and where our individual and collective powers lay. So I was excited to see the objectives around civic engagement. And I wanted to really just hear your thoughts around 2 points where it says deep investments in civic engagement in schools. I'm assuming you mean K-12, and then fund civic engagement training through institutions like Keene University. Can you talk a little bit, Reverend Boyer, about the importance of our younger generations understanding their power in civic engagement and what you envision it looks like if we can reinstitute that training and that knowledge back into our younger generation so that becomes normalized, right, as a part of being a productive part of making change in communities?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And because that's very important to me. And as I alluded to earlier, you know, being in this work, coming to this basically from the street and the soapbox to being at the table in the state house, I've had to understand some things in order to actually get things accomplished. The nature of our democracy is one where there's a give and take and where there's levers to pull. and trust me, I am that guy that wants to see one day, I'm probably the major, you know, everybody has everything they need. I'm probably the crazy democratic socialist kind of person. Power is, so I trust me, I'm that guy. But until somebody shows me what the revolution is going to look like, we got to work with what we have, right? And what we have, and especially from the framework that I come from the Black church, which has invested so much blood in in voting rights, in the ability to participate in this democracy. This becomes a sacred work. And so the area of civic engagement and salvation and social justice, and myself and my own evolution in this work, has come to understand that you can't call plays from outside the stadium. So you have to be on the field, and civic engagement and this democracy, it's a contact sport. You have to be involved at all levels, and voting is just one small part of what it takes to bring about any kind of justice in the society. And so, as I have learned what is necessary, how government works, how does money get appropriated, how do your streets get fixed, who moves dollars from the federal all the way down to the municipal. What are all these things? How does the county work? What are the different positions in all the different places? And when you begin to understand all those levers and understand the power of the vote and how those things are leveraged, and how I think what young people ultimately need to understand, because you hear folks say all the time things like, oh, well, they come around, they make promises, or they say they're going to do this and do that. And the biggest mistake that we have made is somehow thinking that politicians are leaders. Politicians are not leaders. Politicians are hired by us to go do what we tell them to do. And we put too much weight on politicians and take all the responsibility off us. So our democracy is a hot mess because we've been disengaged. And corruption and injustice flourishes in a so-called democracy where the people are not democratically engaged. And it has a harder time operating when folks are participating fully. And so the more that we realize that, we understand that, and the more that we participate in it at all levels, and so teach young people that things are bad because we don't get involved. Now we know that it's a lot more complicated than that, right? But we can't, the things that we can change, the behavior we can change is our own. And if we start there, it becomes a lot harder for people to do bad things. And so these kind of investments need to be done. The whole reason we get a Donald Trump is from an ignorant and disengaged electorate. That's why we have an ignoramus in the White House, because he is a reflection of the electorate. And so until we do better, we will get basically what we bought, rather whether that's through disengagement or whatnot. So that's why this is critically important. I could go on for days here, but I hope I've got to the essence of your question. So we need to do this at very young ages. Let folks know how this works, why they need to be engaged. I do want to say this last piece. Um, we saw very low. I've been going around. I've been talking to black folks around the state and saying we're all pissed off about everything that's going on. And you know why you're pissed? Like we deserve. This is what I would say to folks. We're in a place right now because we're not voting. Our numbers are so low. So if our numbers are so low, they do whatever they want. Because why should they listen to you? Because why should they care about your issue when you show that you don't care about it? That was the message that we took on the road. And in this election, black folks showed up. And now it becomes our response, right? And we say we weren't necessarily going to vote for Mikie Sherrill because Mikie Sherrill said something that was so great. We said we participated in the primary. This was our agenda. This is what we want. Then, in order to get our support in the general, this is what we want. When she gets it right, then and we did our part. We mobilized the vote. So in terms of the black church, we mobilized the vote. We took part. We showed up. So we delivered, which means we have currency. That currency gets us something. We're saying you're here. This is the agenda. This is why we just had the press conference, just making sure everybody knows this is where we're at, and yada, yada, yada. And that means of accountability keeps on going. So we are trying to model real time for people what civic engagement looks like so folks can see it and hopefully model it. I'm sorry I took so much time there, but that's such a critical piece of where we are that I'm just very passionate about it. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you. And the next speaker, next questioner is Greg Stankowitz. Greg?
Thanks, Linda. And Reverend Boyer, thank you for everything you and your organization's doing. I think you had a tremendous impact on the election. So my question really is an outgrowth of your last answer. And from a tactical standpoint, when we talk about civic engagement and democracy, it's under assault right now from a federal government that really does not care about that. So I so much admire the agenda. I think it's so important. But who are the partners that you see right now in New Jersey? And is there, from your perspective, groups that are coming together across different constituencies, across different policy sectors that we can mobilize as a bulwark against the assault that we're getting in so many different ways from a federal government that doesn't care about these things?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think um I think there's several things going on, and I think it all comes back to the ballot box. And some of it is right, we have to, I don't want to put it this way, but kind of know where our lane is. So because I'm hyper focused on New Jersey, right, to the point because these assaults on our democracy for the most part are coming from Washington, D.C. We certainly have assaults on democracy here in New Jersey, so I don't want to make light of that. But for the most part, um, right, the major assault is coming from Washington, D.C. And so, first and foremost, I think because various constituencies were on the same page about that. Another reason why this election was so critical, mobilizing there, is because the Attorney General plays such a critical role in pushing back on that. And so folks kind of get that. So we have to protect that role to make sure because this governor is more powerful than any. And a lot of the discussions that we've had with the Sherrill incoming Sherrill administration, and we see other people as well are having the same discussion because whether it be voting rights, whether it be protections against ICE and all of the federal assaults, funding cuts, that we need an attorney general who's going to sue the hell out of them and keep fighting them and put up as many protections as possible. So we see a lot of cross sections there where even though we might be coming with different agenda items and different interests, but we all are meeting at the same intersection, which is we need an AG that's going to push back. So that's that. That's one piece. I also think it's critically important is again, as we're going up to the midterms, right? Not only do we have to protect the seats that we have, but we have to try and grab other seats as much as possible within the context of here in New Jersey, right? And that's part of a larger, and regardless of the constituencies that we're in, if it's Black, Latino, various other groups, just progressive in general, and other various constituencies, we all on the same page that we need a blue wave ultimately, because that's going to be the greatest protection that we have against all of this, is to grab back at least one of those other houses of government. So that's the other piece. And then the last piece that I would say um is certainly having a lot of these kinds of discussions, and I think the more that I have focused on a explicitly Black agenda and work with, I work with a lot of the AAPI groups, a lot of the Latino groups specifically, and we have very focused agendas. And when you really look at it, it's extremely rare that those agenda items actually fight each other. When you have when you have good actors, for the most part, what's many of us have many of the same things on the agenda. And so I think ultimately, I think we're moving in the same direction, probably more so than we ever have, even though there may be a little less coordination than there ever was. And I think this common enemy, which is an assault on our humanity, decency, and human rights, has really united people without us going crazy trying to get there. And I think the best harmonies are the ones that you stumble upon, not the ones that you try to force.
Thank you. Michelle Tuck Ponder, former mayor of Princeton, has a question.
Hello, Reverend Boyer.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I am well. You're one of the other folks. You and Carolyn, I was gonna shout y'all out, but I figure I'd start getting lost in here. I'll start shouting all my friends out.
No, that's right. That's the cardinal rule. Here's my question, though. So I've been involved in politics for a very long time, and my question is about sustainability of the effort.
Hmm.
I had, when I worked in the office of a governor, my recollection is that he would not have been elected but for the enthusiastic and overwhelming support of African American voters. And by the midterm of his term, and I was a staff person in the governor's office, I had to fight tooth and nail to get him to meet with the NAACP and other civil rights advocates at that level. That the memories of Election Day and competing interests tend to make memories fade. And additionally, depending on who that governor puts around them, they can also limit access and decide that other priorities are more important. So my question for you is two parts. One is how do we sustain the momentum that we have now um, in with the governor's office and the access that we have? But the second question has to do with my personal experiences is how do we engage local elected officials in this effort to keep these issues and concerns and priorities at the forefront?
So thank you for such a perfect and wonderful and thoughtful question, of which I would expect nothing less. But thank you for that. And I don't want to pretend that I have a perfect answer here, because I think some of this I'm learning as we go along. But it's some initial thoughts. One, in terms of I think there's something a little bit different, and I can't speak to your specific um, example. But I do know, so for instance, Phil Murphy was elected with 94% of the Black vote. The The issue was that I've had a lot of discussion with Black communities was, 90, there's a big difference between 94% of 10 and 50% of 100. And when I started breaking that down to people, just because somebody says, just because not 94%, but if the turnout was low, it doesn't really make a difference. We need a strong, raw vote, robust turnout. The Black vote has consistently gone down since Barack Obama. And there's a major drop off, really, amongst all folks um, in New Jersey between the presidential elections and the gubernatorial elections. But Black people and in the Black areas, they really drop. And part of what we were trying to get folks to understand was 94% means nothing if the turnout numbers are not high. So stop saying 94% because we're in an illusion, and it allows us to create this urban myth that we are responsible for somebody getting in when we're actually not. And so, because we're not responsible, they have no reason to respond to your agenda or take your meeting because you're lying to yourself and they're placating you by just giving you your talking point of 94%. Once we kind of got that through, right, we saw in this election there were actually strong, raw vote numbers. So not only percentage, but actually strong numbers. They're about, Mikie Sherrill won by about 500,000 votes, over 500,000 votes. She had a decisive win. About 300,000 of those were Black votes, right? So there were, and obviously just the population numbers in New Jersey work in such a way, right? There's not as many Black folks as there are white folks in New Jersey. That's just the numbers, right? But when you put the Black votes with the Latino votes with the Asian votes, all of a sudden you get such a strong plurality that not only that you get a decisive win, because the majority of white folks did not vote for Mikie Sherrill, nor have they any Democratic governor. So I say all that to say this time, I think there's a different kind of responsiveness because I hate to use this crude analysis, but this is what I have. We're not shooting blanks anymore. There's actually bullets in the gun. So now all of a sudden people have to pay attention. The numbers are there. And so in terms of they're gonna want that same, and I've had the discussion. I've said, listen, I don't want to make it a hard sell 4 years from now of why we need to support again. So we really need to lean in. We're putting this agenda out. Our job is to communicate with our constituencies. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're fighting for. Right? When something is accomplished, we're going to say this what those kind of communications, and then a win for her, a win for us is a win for her. It's a win for Black folks, and that kind of momentum keeps going. So reward good behavior and hold them accountable. So that in terms of sustaining, but also I think there's going to be some momentum, I think, going into the midterms, and we just have to keep in front of the people to discuss the wins and how we move things. I am and I'm very concerned that that kind of momentum does not. Once people get comfortable, then the vote drops off again. We end up in the same place all over again. But I'm hoping one of the things that I'm trying to do through the long-term things in terms of civic engagement education, because we need for the long term people to understand everything that's at stake and why we need to show up for everything. Um, so yeah, I think we can sustain all that. I think it's up to folks like myself, those who are in who have the privilege of leadership. The responsibility is on us to hold the elected officials accountable, and to keep things in front of the people and to communicate clearly. I forgot the last piece in terms. I was very excited at the press conference that we did. Several local officials were at the press conference and came up to me and said, "You know what, Rev? One thing we're going to do, we're going to vote on a resolution to support the Black agenda. And maybe you want to consider asking local townships, local municipalities throughout the state to have resolutions in support of the Black agenda. That would be a way to pull us all and be involved." And I said, that's a fantastic idea. And so that's one of the ways in terms of what we're thinking with local officials and what that can look like. We're exploring how we can put some muscle into making a push for municipalities, council people to put forth resolutions to support the Black agenda, and hopefully that would help trickle down into municipal governments and county governments to take a look at this agenda from their standpoint of what they could do on those levels as well.
Thank you.
I love the idea of bringing a resolution to the Princeton Council. But I'm going to,
Me too.
the next question is going to come from the chair of Not in Our Town, Princeton, Caroline Clark.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Reverend Boyer. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
As you've said, history has shown us that the Black community benefits the least from the struggles and the fights that we have fought hard for. We have led the fight on those issues, but we've benefited the least. So how does this Black agenda ensure that history doesn't repeat itself, and that those of us at the very bottom who are still leading the fights in this country benefit the most from the fight and the Black agenda? I just keep seeing history repeat itself in every single one of the systems that we look at. And I just want to know, how are we going to ensure through this Black agenda that that does not happen this time around?
Yeah, thank you so much for that's another great question. Thank you so much for that. And certainly the things that I put out here, I don't think are the magic bullet, but they're things that I have considered. And so thank you for that. I think there's a couple of things. One, I can't stress how important it is and why I engage this work as a Black clergyman, and the important, why our organization is hyper focused on the Black church and the Black faith community. Because I think first and foremost, there has been a dereliction of duty within the Black community to tell the story and to keep the history alive. So we don't benefit a lot because we have no idea what happened, what's there, why it's there. Like we just go, so we have to do a better job of teaching our own history. And we should not be dependent upon the school system to teach our history. I find there's no other oppressed people on the planet that depends on their oppressor to teach them their history. But yet and still that becomes something that we're just, and not to say that we're not going to advocate for it and that truth shouldn't be told. That's not what I'm saying. But the primary history teacher ought to be, in my opinion, especially, as someone who comes to this from a religious standpoint, Moses teaches the people, he teaches their faith institution to teach their history. It's their responsibility to teach their history. And we see in other faith traditions that they teach their history to their people. And so it is the responsibility of the Black church to teach our history. If we understood our history, then for instance, we wouldn't be so obsessed with trying to go to Princeton. We'd be more obsessed with going to Howard if we understood our history. We wouldn't be so, trying to get into every white institution because we better appreciate institutions that our folks fought and built And so it's very important for us to lean in and to teach and to teach that history. That's one. Two, um, one of the reasons, another reason why we started a policy organization, not just a advocacy organization, um, because what the systems aren't accustomed to is a lot of Black folks sophisticated enough to know when we're being lied to or when the shim sham is going on in the details. So I can tell you, right, as a Black preacher and somebody who has been dealing in this work, one thing that New Jersey political figures were not accustomed to is a Black preacher that understands policy, that writes the policy, that can go back and forth with them on the because the devil is in the details. Most folks are just happy because they know the title of the bill, but can't get into the sophisticated language in order to make sure that what the bill is supposed to do actually does, and then does the follow through afterwards to make sure the implementation actually happens. Because a bill gets passed and then the real work begins, implementation, and then follow through. What does it look like? Is it hitting the marks that it's supposed to hit? Those are all the things that need to happen in order to ensure those things. Because a lot of times we think if we got the trophy, the race is over. And a lot of times all you're doing is sitting with the trophy, but you never got the money from the grand prize. And you're just happy because you got a trophy on your shelf. So we have to be sophisticated enough to keep fighting until every dime from the grand prize is paid and not be satisfied with trophies. So hopefully that answers your question.
Great.
Thank you.
Um, it's after 8 o'clock. We have one more question, which I don't want to deny Ted Fetter his opportunity, but it will mean that, as you may know, Reverend Boyer, we go into breakout groups and have small group discussions, which we intend to do, but so it might be that time might be shortened. Ted, are you ready to ask your question?
Yes, let me be very brief in the question. Thank you, Reverend Boyer, for being here and for everything you've said tonight. It makes a great deal of sense. And in that sense, or that perspective of political reality and what you can accomplish, what we all can accomplish in a Mikie Sherrill administration, my question concerns reparations. A big issue from the Institute for Social Justice. Do you think under a Governor Sherrill administration there is any likelihood at all that some long-range impact can be or advance can be made concerning the issue of reparations?
I don't know. I just don't know. Um, and I don't want to say no because these folks have already surprised me in ways that I didn't expect. I don't want to say yes because I also think it's a little bit unfair um to put on the shoulders of one person something that nobody else has been able to do, and also something that's been extremely difficult to do all throughout the country. With all that being said, I think that there are models that are happening that need to be communicated to this administration on ways that they can move and make real progress on this issue. For instance, Westmore in Maryland is doing some extremely impressive things. And I think, and as somebody who walked with Mikie Sherrill here in New Jersey, I think they could literally adopt much of what he is doing, which is very thoughtful, very just, and have some success with it. And so I don't want to say no, because I don't see these folks as unreasonable. But I also know I want to be very clear that every single substantive progress that Black people have ever advanced has been met with a very violent backlash from the majority of the white electorate. And if we don't have the honest conversation about that is the biggest thing that holds this issue back, if we don't have that honest conversation, we'll never be able to move the ball forward. So again, we need such a strong electorate of righteous minded thinkers that it gives the mandate to do just that. And so I think we can make progress here, because I think the closest that we've had to that kind of electorate is the one that just put her in office. Um, what I think, just from a political, practical kind of mindset, is, well, if I would do something, it would have to be after it has much less political consequence, because knowing the history, I'll never see a second term by doing that kind of thing. I think that's just the political reality, especially because I'm just keeping it real, and there's somebody who obviously wants to see reparations. I just think we have to have honest conversations. We know that there will be a massive white backlash to doing something that just. And if we don't factor for that, what are we doing? So until we have that kind of conversation, until we figure that out, I think it's going to be immensely difficult for anybody to do it in a flat out kind of put it all on the table way that many of us would want to see it.
I think that's a great answer. Thank you.
Wow, what a great conclusion. The reality of what we're facing. Reverend Boyer, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to meet with us to share the work that you are doing, and with the hope that we will hear from you again, that we will be able to support you in your endeavors and with salvation and social justice. It is so critical to, again, achieving racial and economic justice and equity in the state of New Jersey. Thank you again.
Thank you all so much. It's always a privilege to be with you. I look forward to seeing you all again soon, all around Mercer County. Blessings.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn the program now over to Mikie Mendelson, our board member who oversees these programs. And I'm going to share my screen so that you can see hold on a moment. See our community agreements.
In just a minute, we're going to go into breakout rooms for a few minutes. But just to remind you of the community agreements, listen to each other respectfully so that each person has an opportunity to be heard. Take space, make space. People are encouraged to overcome their reluctance to talk. Take care not to dominate the conversation. Allow everyone to have equal airtime. Be careful not to interrupt when someone else is speaking. The next one, please agree to respect one another's privacy by keeping this discussion and people's names and identities confidential. We ask that you embrace the concept whatever is said and shared in this room stays in this room. Please speak from your own personal experience and avoid making generalizations. The next one, white people may feel uncomfortable when a person of color shares a hard truth. They should also understand that sharing these truths can be painful or even traumatic for the person of color. And while we commit to centering these conversations through the lens of race, participants may experience these conversations through a variety of lenses. We acknowledge intersectionality, the interconnected nature of social categories such as race, class, and gender regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. We make space for the breadth of human experience and all are welcome. And we just have 2 questions tonight, but I think they're all inclusive. Which item or items on the Black agenda do you think should have top priority and why? Explain why implementing the Black agenda benefits everyone in the state. Okay, and Linda will be moving us into breakout rooms for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll return back to this room for a close up.
Hi. I tried to put you back in room 3. Oh, there you go.
Now, thanks to the wonders of the electronic uh, transporter beam, is what it always feels like to me. We're all back in one space again. And I'm Shelley Krause. I'm a member of the Not in Our Town team, and I'm curious. I always want to try to make sure that anything that got lifted up in the smaller rooms that you think is particularly vital or resonant, that you have an opportunity to share it with the somewhat broader group once we're all gathered again. So if there is anybody who's feeling like, oh, this thing came up that was so interesting or so powerful, please take a moment to unmute and go ahead and share that with us so that we can magnify it.
Kimmy, this is Caroline. Kimmy, you were about to make a point, and then we got switched to the main group. So I'm just saying maybe you would like to finish your point here.
Well, no, I wasn't going to make a point, but I will share. Thank you, Caroline. I will share one of the things we talked about is the society that we live in is very individualized. We're not taught to think collectively, collaboratively, right? That's something that we have to consciously shift our thinking in order to do. And so when Reverend Boyer talked about how Black folks really have not quite grasped yet, how we collaboratively come together in our own individual power, collective power as Black folks, and that we seem to think success means being able to assimilate into, white institutions. And we have historically Black colleges and universities and churches because we were not welcome there, right? And it's in those safe spaces that we begin to learn and understand our culture. But we've been socialized to believe that individually success is when we become prominent in our own right. We pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And because of the way we've been socialized to believe that, coupled with socialized around who is superior and who is inferior, we as a country believe that equity is like pie, right? So if you get a bigger piece of the pie, then I get less. Okay. And then we know, just understanding the dynamics of white supremacy, one of the ways that that continues to perpetuate generation through generation is this concept of white silence, right? And so we are not going to talk about the privilege that we have. And if you talk about your oppression, then you're using the race card, right? But what we are going to do is, as soon as we see somebody of color or any type of progress from a demographic of color, we're going to squash that so fiercely, because we believe that if you get more, then we get less, and you don't deserve to have more just by virtue of your inferiority. And I think one of the things that would have been really important for Reverend Boyer to talk about is, one of the reasons Black folks don't come together in our collective power is because every time we have, our leaders have been slaughtered, we've been met with violence and brutality, and we've been taught that the safest way is to focus on our individual survival, to maintain our own peace of mind, and to protect ourselves from mental and emotional and financial trauma, right? And so it's not like, oh, Black folks are just lazy, or we just don't understand the power that we have. No, we understand white backlash better than white folks understand it themselves, because we're the ones who carry that trauma literally in our genes from generation to generation. So it's very complex, and there needs to be a shift in our cultural thinking before we can undo a lot of the dynamics that comes with white supremacy and Black suppression.
Yeah. So well said. Really a shift in consciousness and in available concepts is what's required. It's a big, heavy lift and a collaborative one. Linda, go ahead.
I'm thinking that the other side of that coin, Kimmy, is something that a statement I've heard, that to those who have been dominant, equity or equality feels like oppression.
Absolutely. It absolutely does. And it's not just in terms of race, right? It feels that way if you're straight cisgender. And now there's a conversation around equity for LGBTQ. And that feels like us cisgender folks are now being oppressed. We're not, but we're just so used to walking in that privilege and not having to focus on other people, right? And so you're absolutely right. But the oppression that comes in the LGBTQ community is not nearly as big as the oppression around Black folks. And so how much harder is it for white folks to wrap their head around trying to grasp equity, right? Because even if you are in the LGBTQ plus community, you still live with the privilege of being white, right? And
Yep.
so you're absolutely correct. If you've lived in that bubble of privilege, then having to be told that you need to share that privilege feels like oppression.
Anybody else have a quick little reflection that they'd like to share? I'm conscious of the time.
Just to build on what you just said, which is, it's if you are intersectional, in other words, if you're a woman and Black, so then you've got two strikes against you, or if you're a transgender and Black, so it's it's sort of a double whammy.
This was a great conversation, and I appreciate that Not in Our Town, Princeton is courageous in terms of recognizing the different types of oppression, and is not afraid to elevate how very unique the Black African American experience is in this country.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'm going to close out. Greg, thank you for reminding me it's all about community, 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 community. So we've got to help to undo that mindset of individualism. Kimmy and Caroline reminded me, and that if we've got to join forces with ourselves and each other. So staying in community is the only way we're going to get this done. It's in our mission statement.
And we hope that you'll all join us again next month. For those of you who are feeling like, oh, I want to hear more of what Kimmy had to say, you're in luck. Come back next month.
Good job.
Kimmy has done an advocacy training called Race, Racism, and the Way Forward, and is going to be providing us next month on the 5th of January with a kind of highlight of that training, including a foundational understanding of the construct of race, racism as infrastructural and systemic, and also addressing the grief and trauma that continues to undergird our American way of life. So that should be a really vital conversation. Please, think about who in your life needs to be in this space and go get them. Bring them back with you into the new year. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your time and the gifts of your attention and activism. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Everyone.
Stay well.